The last hues of sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in strokes of gold and crimson. Ethan Maxwell leaned against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the distant hum of the city reverberating through the glass. At 32, he was the envy of many, a tech entrepreneur whose vision had birthed an empire. Yet tonight, the vast expanse of his wealth felt like nothing more than an echo in a hollow chamber. The grandeur of his home spoke volumes: marble floors, designer furniture, and walls adorned with priceless art. But for Ethan, they were merely decorations masking a void. The memories of his parents, lost in a plane crash when he was a teenager, haunted the quiet corners of his mind. "Money can't buy happiness," his father used to say. Those words, once dismissed, now lingered like a bitter truth. Breaking his reverie, Ethan downed the last of his whiskey and decided he needed air, anything to escape the oppressive weight of his thoughts. He grabbed his car keys and stepped into his sleek black Aston Martin, letting the roar of the engine fill the silence as he navigated the streets aimlessly. The sharp chill of the evening air greeted Clara Bennett as she tightened her coat around her shoulders. Next to her, Lila, her 12-year-old daughter, adjusted the cardboard sign they carried everywhere. "Homeless, anything helps." The street lamp cast a pale glow over their corner of the city, where pedestrians hurried by, heads down, eyes averted. Clara's pride refused to let her beg outright, but every rejection cut deeper. Lila, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood with her hopeful smile, though hunger and exhaustion were evident in her small frame. As the minutes ticked by, Clara's resolve began to falter. She wondered, not for the first time, if she had made the right choice leaving behind her past life. But she couldn't dwell on regrets now, not when her daughter's future depended on her strength. Ethan spotted them at a red light, their figures huddled together under the dim glow of the street lamp. Something about the scene made him pause. Was it the way the woman held her head high, despite her circumstances? Or perhaps the determination in the young girl's eyes, so unyielding despite the world's indifference? On impulse, he pulled over. The growl of the engine startled them as he approached, his tailored coat and polished shoes a stark contrast to their tattered appearance. "Good evening," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the din of the street. Clara looked up, her expression guarded. "I'd like to help you," she shook her head firmly. "We don't take handouts. If you have work, we're willing to earn it." The response surprised him. In a world where many would have accepted money without question, her pride was almost jarring. Ethan hesitated, considering his next move. "Work?" he repeated thoughtfully. An idea formed. "I have a big house," he said slowly. "It could use some upkeep, cleaning, organizing. Would you be interested?" Clara studied him intently, searching for any trace of pity or ill intent in his expression. Lila tugged at her arm, whispering, "Mom, maybe we should—" Finally, Clara nodded. "We'll work. But I need to know this isn't charity." Ethan offered a rare smile. "Sometimes it's about giving someone a chance. Let me give you one." That night, Ethan opened his home to Clara and Lila. The basement, once a storage space, was hastily prepared into a makeshift living area. Clara's gratitude was evident in the way she threw herself into her work, while Lila's laughter began to echo through the previously lifeless halls. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt alive. Yet, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than coincidence. The warmth they brought was accompanied by an unspoken tension, a sense that their stories held depths yet to be revealed. What secrets did they carry? And why, for the first time in years, Did Ethan feel like he had something to look forward to? The first morning in Ethan Maxwell's mansion dawned quietly, with soft sunlight streaming through the expansive windows of the basement. Clara Bennett stirred awake on the plush mattress Ethan had hastily arranged for her and Lila. For the first time in months, they had a roof over their heads, warmth and safety. Clara glanced at her daughter, who was still sound asleep on the smaller bed Ethan had procured just for her. Lila's face was peaceful, devoid of the worry and fatigue that had marked their time on the streets. Clara's heart clenched with gratitude and apprehension. Gratitude for this opportunity, and apprehension about whether it was too good to be true. Upstairs, Ethan sipped his coffee, gazing at the city skyline. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind. He wasn't one to make impulsive decisions, yet something about Clara and Lila had stirred something within him. A desire to help, yes, but also a yearning for connection. Alfred, his longtime butler, entered the room, holding a tablet with the day's schedule. "Sir," Alfred began cautiously, "I took the liberty of preparing a list of services to assist your guests. If I may say so, you may not," Ethan interrupted with a faint smirk. "They're not charity cases, Alfred. They're here to work, and that's exactly what they'll do." Alfred inclined his head, but couldn't entirely conceal his skepticism. "Very well, sir. Shall I ensure they're settled comfortably?" Ethan nodded, finishing his coffee. "Let's see how this unfolds." By mid-morning, Clara and Lila explored the mansion cautiously, marveling at its grandeur. The high ceilings, intricate chandeliers, and tastefully adorned walls made Clara feel like she'd stepped into another world. Lila's eyes sparkled as she trailed her fingers along a marble countertop in the sprawling kitchen. "Mom, have you ever seen a kitchen this big?" Lila asked in awe. "Never," Clara admitted, running her hand over the stainless steel appliances. She couldn't imagine cooking in such a space. As they ventured further, they discovered rooms filled with books, a home theater, and even a swimming pool. Their awe was tempered by a sense of unease. This wasn't their world, and Clara felt the weight of proving her worth. The day's work began with Clara tackling the dust-covered bookshelves in the library. She methodically cleaned and organized, her focus steady. Ethan passed through occasionally, observing her with curiosity. "You're thorough," he remarked during one such visit. "I believe in earning my keep," Clara replied, without looking up, her tone firm but not unfriendly. Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Clara. I wouldn't have brought you here if I didn't think you deserved a chance." Clara paused, meeting his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. But for me, this isn't about proving myself to you. It's about showing my daughter that hard work matters." Ethan nodded, impressed by her resolve. Meanwhile, Lila found herself drawn to the kitchen. She rummaged through the pantry, marveling at the array of ingredients. A sudden idea sparked, and she decided to cook something, a gesture of thanks for their host. When Ethan returned to the dining room for lunch, he was greeted by an unfamiliar aroma. On the table sat a steaming pot of hearty vegetable soup, accompanied by freshly toasted bread. Lila appeared from the kitchen, nervously wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope you don't mind, Mr. Maxwell. I thought I'd cook for us. It's not fancy, but—" Ethan tasted the soup and immediately smiled. "It's perfect, Lila." "Thank you." Clara joined them shortly after, her eyes softening as she saw the scene. For a moment, it felt like a family meal, simple, warm, and comforting. Later that afternoon, as Ethan reviewed documents in his study, a faint melody drifted through the air. Curious, he followed the sound down to the basement. He found Lila humming softly as she tidied up, her voice carrying a sweetness that tugged at his heart. Ethan leaned against the doorway, listening. You have a beautiful voice, Lila. She jumped, startled. Oh, I didn't know anyone was there. You should sing more often, Ethan encouraged. Lila shrugged shyly. It's just something I do, to pass the time. Ethan made a mental note to encourage her creativity, seeing potential in her that reminded him of his own youthful ambitions. As night fell, the mansion quieted, and each resident retreated to their respective spaces. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, brushing Lila's hair as they spoke in hushed tones. Do you think we'll be able to stay here long, Mom? Lila asked hesitantly. I don't know, sweetheart, Clara admitted. But for now, we'll do our best and see what happens. Unbeknownst to them, Ethan stood outside the door, listening. Their conversation only strengthened his resolve to ensure they felt at home, though he couldn't yet explain why their presence meant so much to him. The seeds of change had been planted in the hearts of all three. Ethan, Clara, and Lila were beginning to form a bond, a fragile connection that would soon be tested by revelations and challenges they could never have anticipated. Ethan Maxwell couldn't help but notice the subtle transformation happening within his mansion. The once cold and impersonal atmosphere was warming, shaped by the quiet presence of Clara and Lila. It wasn't just the aroma of homemade meals or the sight of polished rooms. It was the energy they brought, an intangible spark of life. One late afternoon, Ethan was in his study, engrossed in reviewing quarterly reports for his tech company. Despite his best efforts, his mind kept wandering to the new dynamic in his home. He heard faint sounds, soft laughter from Lila in the kitchen, and Clara humming a tune as she worked. The noises were unfamiliar but oddly comforting. A melody interrupted his thoughts. It was faint, almost ethereal, drifting through the air like a gentle invitation. Intrigued, Ethan left his papers and followed the sound down the grand staircase and towards the basement. The door to the basement studio was ajar. Inside, he found Clara seated before an easel, her movements precise yet graceful. The canvas before her was alive with color, depicting a stunning urban scene of New York City at sunset. The interplay of light and shadow was so vivid it seemed as though the painting itself was breathing. Ethan stood in silence for a moment, captivated by the sight of Clara painting. There was a serenity about her, a deep focus that suggested she was entirely in her element. Finally he spoke, his voice soft, so as not to startle her. Clara, I didn't know you painted. Clara jumped slightly, her brush slipping from her hand. She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of awe and curiosity. I'm sorry, she said quickly, as if she'd been caught doing something forbidden. I found these old supplies in the attic. I didn't think anyone would mind. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes on the canvas. Mind? Clara, this is incredible. Where did you learn to paint like this? Clara hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. It's been years since I last held a brush. I studied at the National Academy of Fine Arts a long time ago. I even had exhibitions in galleries back then. Why did you stop? Ethan asked gently, sensing the weight behind her words. Clara looked away, her voice quiet. Life happened. Circumstances forced me to make choices I never wanted to make. The conversation could have ended there, but Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. Clara, you're extraordinary. Have you ever thought about painting again, professionally? Clara shook her head, a rueful smile on her lips. I appreciate the compliment, Mr. Maxwell, but that part of my life feels like it belongs to someone else now. Call me Ethan, he said, smiling. And what if I told you it doesn't have to stay in the past? I could set up a proper studio for you. You could paint again. Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing her face, before doubt crept in. Ethan, you've already done so much for Lila and me. I can't ask for more. You're not asking, Ethan replied. I'm offering. Think of it as an investment, not just in your talent, but in yourself. Clara studied him for a long moment, before nodding slowly. All right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But only if you promise not to expect miracles. Ethan grinned. I don't need miracles, Clara. Just you, doing what you love. That evening, over dinner, Ethan shared his plans with Lila. Your mom has agreed to let me set up a studio for her, he said, smiling at Clara. Lila's face lit up. Mom, that's amazing. You're always so happy when you paint. I can't wait to see more of your work. Clara blushed, brushing off Lila's enthusiasm. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's been a long time. You're going to be amazing, Lila insisted, her voice filled with confidence. Ethan watched the exchange with quiet amusement. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his wealth and status. The following days were a flurry of activity, as Ethan turned one of the unused rooms in his mansion into a fully equipped art studio. Canvases, brushes, and high-quality paints filled the space. Clara, overwhelmed by the gesture, promised herself she wouldn't let him down. She began painting again, starting with simple landscapes to reacquaint herself with the craft. But as the days passed, her confidence grew, and her work became bolder, more expressive. Ethan often joined her in the studio, watching her create with fascination. You should try, Clara said one day, handing him a brush. Ethan laughed, holding up his hands. Me? I haven't painted since grade school. It's never too late to start, Clara replied with a teasing smile. Reluctantly, Ethan picked up the brush and approached an empty canvas. Under Clara's patient guidance, he made hesitant strokes, each one slightly more confident than the last. Before long, he was engrossed, the stress of his daily life fading into the background. One evening, while Ethan and Clara were working in the studio, Lila brought in a tray of snacks. She sat on the floor, watching them with a contented smile. This is nice, she said softly. It feels like a home. Ethan paused, looking at her. It is a home, he said firmly. For all of us. Clara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change for the better. As the weeks passed, Clara's paintings began to take on new life. Each one told a story, reflecting not only her artistic skill, but also the emotions she had carried for years. One painting, in particular, caught Ethan's attention, a depiction of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out over a stormy sea. This is powerful, Ethan said, studying the piece. What inspired it? Clara hesitated before answering. It's about choices, she said finally. The moments that define us, when we have to decide whether to leap or retreat. Ethan nodded, understanding more than he let on. And what do you think she'll choose? Clara's gaze lingered on the painting. I think she'll leap, she said softly. Unbeknownst to them, their lives were about to be disrupted in ways they couldn't have imagined. The bonds they were forming, the trust they were building, would soon be tested by secrets from Clara's past, and a figure who was already watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The mansion had grown quieter after dinner. Lila was in the kitchen cleaning up, while Clara excused herself to the studio to put the finishing touches on a new painting. Ethan, however, couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at him since their conversation about her past. Something about Clara's guarded expression when she mentioned circumstances didn't sit right with him. As the night deepened, Ethan found himself wandering through the mansion. His footsteps led him to the attic, where years of untouched belongings from his family's past were stored. He hadn't visited this place since his parents' death, and the weight of their absence hung heavily in the air. While sorting through old boxes, Ethan stumbled upon something unusual. A locked wooden box, tucked under a pile of dusty books. The box bore initials engraved on its surface, CTI. Ethan's brow furrowed. Clara Thompson? The initials matched hers, but he couldn't fathom how something belonging to Clara could end up among his family's possessions. Intrigued, he carried the box downstairs to his study. The keyhole looked old, but Ethan wasn't deterred. After a few attempts with paper clips and small tools, the lock clicked open. Inside, he found several envelopes, photographs, and a sketchbook. The photographs were the first to catch his attention. There was a younger Clara, smiling radiantly, standing beside a man Ethan instantly recognized, Richard Kane. The man's face, confident and calculating, stared back at Ethan like a ghost from the past. Ethan's heart raced as he flipped through more photos, each one painting a picture of a life Clara had never mentioned. The sketchbook was filled with rough outlines of paintings that seemed familiar. One of them was nearly identical to a piece Ethan remembered hanging in his childhood home, an artwork his parents had said was part of a private collection. Ethan sat back, the implications swirling in his mind. Could his parents' dealings with Richard have involved Clara? And if so, what role did she play in the web of deception that seemed to stretch across his life? The next morning, Ethan approached Clara in the studio. She was working on a new painting, her brow furrowed in concentration. He hesitated, not wanting to upset her, but the questions burning inside him left him no choice. "Clara," he began carefully, holding the box in his hands. "I found this in the attic last night." Clara froze. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto the box. Her face paled, and she set down her brush. "Where did you find that?" "In a pile of my parents' belongings," Ethan said. "Why would this be here? And why does it have your initials?" Clara took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the box. She opened it and stared at its contents, her expression a mixture of longing and sorrow. "I never thought I'd see this again," she murmured. Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "Clara, I need to know the truth. How are you connected to Richard Kane? And what does any of this have to do with my family?" Clara sat down, her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had been placed on them. "Richard and I were partners once," she admitted. "Not in business, but in life. I was young, ambitious, and naive. He was charming, and seemed to know everyone who mattered in the art world. At first, it was a dream. My paintings were in galleries, and I felt like I was finally being recognized." Her voice faltered, and Ethan waited patiently for her to continue. "But then I realized he wasn't just helping me. He was using me. Richard was part of a network, a group that created and sold forgeries of famous artworks. He wanted me to create pieces he could pass off as originals. When I refused, things got dark." Ethan's fists clenched. "Dark how?" "He threatened me," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Said he'd ruin me. And when I still wouldn't cooperate, he followed through. My career was destroyed almost overnight. Galleries stopped calling. Buyers disappeared. And then, he went after my family." "Your family?" Ethan asked, his voice tightening. Clara nodded. "Lila was just a baby. I did everything I could to keep her safe. That's why we've been moving from place to place, trying to stay ahead of him." Ethan's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. His parents had worked with Richard on various investments, including art acquisitions. Could it be that they'd unknowingly been part of this forgery scheme? Or worse, had they been complicit? Clara, did my parents know about Richard's activities? Clara hesitated, then shook her head. I don't think they knew the full extent of it. Your father admired art and trusted Richard. But when he started asking too many questions about certain pieces, things changed. That's when the plane crash happened. Ethan's breath caught. You think Richard had something to do with their deaths? Clara's eyes were filled with sorrow. I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me. Richard has no limits when it comes to protecting himself. Ethan stood, pacing the room, as anger and grief surged through him. I won't let him get away with this, he said firmly. Not after what he's done to you. To my family. Clara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Ethan, you have to be careful. Richard is dangerous. He has connections in places you wouldn't believe. That doesn't mean I'll back down, Ethan replied. I'll hire someone to investigate, someone who can help us find the evidence we need to take him down. True to his word, Ethan contacted Rachel Perez, a private investigator known for her discretion and resourcefulness. Within hours, she was at the mansion, poring over the materials Ethan had found. This is a gold mine, Rachel said, holding up one of the photographs. If we can connect these pieces to Richard's network, we'll have a solid case. But we need more. Clara looked uneasy. More? Like what? Proof of transactions, Rachel said. Emails, financial records, anything that shows Richard's involvement in the forgery ring. Do you think he might have left a trail? Clara thought for a moment, then nodded. Richard was arrogant. He always believed he was untouchable. If he kept records, they'd be in his private office. Over the next few days, Rachel worked tirelessly to uncover more about Richard's operations. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed a change in Clara. She seemed lighter, as if sharing her past had lifted a burden she'd carried alone for far too long. One evening, as they stood together in the studio, Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. We're going to get through this, he said. You're not alone anymore. Clara looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. But as the weeks passed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A black car had been parked near the mansion for 2 days, its occupants always hidden behind tinted windows. And though Rachel had made progress in her investigation, it was clear that Richard was already aware of their movements. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than any of them could have imagined. The air in the mansion was tense. Clara's revelation had created ripples that reached every corner of their lives. Ethan, determined to uncover the truth, immersed himself in the investigation. Rachel Perez, the private investigator, had become a fixture at the mansion, her presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking beyond their walls. Meanwhile, Clara and Lila tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though it was clear that the weight of their shared history was pressing down on them. Far from the quiet streets surrounding Ethan's mansion, Richard Kane sat in the opulent study of his Manhattan penthouse. The room was a testament to his wealth and influence, adorned with original paintings, marble sculptures, and shelves lined with rare first editions. Yet, beneath the surface of luxury, lay a man deeply calculating and ruthlessly ambitious. A knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in," Richard said, his voice smooth but cold. A man entered, his demeanor nervous yet efficient. "Mr. Kane, I have news." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Go on." "It seems Clara Thompson has resurfaced." The name caught Richard's attention, though his expression remained impassive. "Is that so?" And where has she been hiding? With a man named Ethan Maxwell, the informant continued. A young millionaire, owner of a tech conglomerate. They've been staying at his mansion. Richard's eyes narrowed, and a dangerous smile spread across his lips. Ethan Maxwell. I've heard of him. And what of Clara's daughter? The girl? She's with them, the man confirmed. Richard rose from his chair and walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Clara has always been resourceful, but aligning herself with someone like Maxwell, interesting. He turned to the informant. Keep a close eye on them. I want to know everything, every move they make. Yes, sir. As the man left, Richard poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He swirled it thoughtfully before taking a sip. Clara, he murmured. It's time we finished what we started. Back at the mansion, Ethan was poring over old records his father had left behind. Bank statements, receipts, and cryptic notes from meetings with Richard Kane painted a picture of a partnership that was far more complicated than he had realized. But nothing definitive tied Richard to the forgeries or to the tragic plane crash that had claimed his parents' lives. Frustrated, Ethan called Rachel into his study. There has to be something we're missing, he said, gesturing to the scattered documents. Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. We need to find a direct link, something that ties Richard to the crash or to the forged paintings. As they worked late into the night, Clara appeared in the doorway. She hesitated before entering, holding a tray with coffee and sandwiches. I thought you two might need a break, she said softly. Ethan looked up, his expression softening. Thanks, Clara. You didn't have to. Clara set the tray down and glanced at the mess of papers. Have you found anything? Not yet, Ethan admitted. But we will. Clara hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, I know you're trying to protect us, but please be careful. Richard isn't someone you can outsmart easily. The air in the mansion was tense. Clara's revelation had created ripples that reached every corner of their lives. Ethan, determined to uncover the truth, immersed himself in the investigation. Rachel Perez, the private investigator, had become a fixture at the mansion, her presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking beyond their walls. Meanwhile, Clara and Lila tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though it was clear that the weight of their shared history was pressing down on them. Far from the quiet streets surrounding Ethan's mansion, Richard Kane sat in the opulent study of his Manhattan penthouse. The room was a testament to his wealth and influence, adorned with original paintings, marble sculptures, and shelves lined with rare first editions. Yet, beneath the surface of luxury, lay a man deeply calculating and ruthlessly ambitious. A knock at the door broke the silence. Come in, Richard said, his voice smooth but cold. A man entered, his demeanor nervous yet efficient. Mr. Kane, I have news. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. Go on. It seems Clara Thompson has resurfaced. The name caught Richard's attention, though his expression remained impassive. Is that so? And where has she been hiding? With a man named Ethan Maxwell, the informant continued. A young millionaire, owner of a tech conglomerate. They've been staying at his mansion. Richard's eyes narrowed, and a dangerous smile spread across his lips. Ethan Maxwell. I've heard of him. And what of Clara's daughter? The girl? She's with them, the man confirmed. Richard rose from his chair and walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Clara has always been resourceful, but aligning herself with someone like Maxwell, interesting. He turned to the informant. Keep a close eye on them. I want to know everything, every move they make. Yes, sir. As the man left, Richard poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He swirled it thoughtfully before taking a sip. Clara, he murmured, it's time we finished what we started. Back at the mansion, Ethan was poring over old records his father had left behind. Bank statements, receipts, and cryptic notes from meetings with Richard Kane painted a picture of a partnership that was far more complicated than he had realized. But nothing definitive tied Richard to the forgeries or to the tragic plane crash that had claimed his parents' lives. Frustrated, Ethan called Rachel into his study. There has to be something we're missing, he said, gesturing to the scattered documents. Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. We need to find a direct link, something that ties Richard to the crash or to the forged paintings. As they worked late into the night, Clara appeared in the doorway. She hesitated before entering, holding a tray with coffee and sandwiches. I thought you two might need a break, she said softly. Ethan looked up, his expression softening. Thanks, Clara. You didn't have to. Clara set the tray down and glanced at the mess of papers. Have you found anything? Not yet, Ethan admitted. But we will. Clara hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, I know you're trying to protect us, but please be careful. Richard isn't someone you can outsmart easily. The morning sun cast a soft glow over the mansion, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with determination and quiet urgency. Ethan, Rachel, Clara, and Lila sat around the large oak table in the dining room, maps, documents, and sketches spread out before them. The team was preparing for their next move, setting up an art exhibition that would serve as both a trap and a statement. The stakes had never been higher. Ethan tapped the blueprint of the mansion's main hall, which had been transformed into a gallery. This is where we'll showcase Clara's pieces, he said, pointing to the layout. We'll make it look like an authentic event. Invitations have already been sent out to key players in the art world, including Richard's known associates. Clara frowned, her hands clenched around her coffee mug. And Richard? He's not going to just walk in without knowing there's something in it for him. Rachel smirked. That's where the bait comes in. She slid a photo of one of Clara's unfinished masterpieces across the table. This piece has been mentioned in several of Richard's communications. We'll position it as the centerpiece of the exhibition. Clara hesitated. That painting? It's deeply personal. Are you sure we need to use it? Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's the only way to draw him out. We'll protect it. And you. As the conversation continued, Lila raised her hand, a determined expression on her face. I want to help. Clara immediately shook her head. Lila, this is too dangerous. Mom, Lila said firmly. I'm not a little girl anymore. I can handle this. Besides, I'm good with details, and I've been helping organize the catering. Who's going to suspect the innocent caterer? Ethan smiled. She has a point, Clara. Lila's sharp, and she knows the layout better than anyone. We'll keep her role low risk. Clara sighed, reluctantly nodding. Fine. But you stay out of sight if things go south. Lila grinned. Deal. Later that day, Clara found herself alone in the makeshift gallery, staring at her painting. It was a hauntingly beautiful piece, a blend of abstract and realism that told the story of her life's struggles and triumphs. Her brush strokes carried secrets, pain, and a hope she hadn't felt in years. Ethan entered quietly, his presence grounding her. It's incredible, he said, standing beside her. Every time I look at it, I see something new. Clara sighed. I never thought I'd see these pieces displayed like this again. And now, they're being used as bait. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're not just using them as bait. We're using them to take back your story, your life. You're reclaiming what Richard tried to steal from you. Clara looked at him, her eyes misty. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Across the city, Richard Kane sat in his dimly lit office, a laptop open before him. His informant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. The invitations have gone out. The exhibition looks legitimate. Richard's lips curled into a sinister smile. And Clara's pieces? Are they authentic? From what I've seen, yes. The centerpiece is one of her most renowned works. Richard leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. Perfect. Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know every detail. The morning sun cast a soft glow over the mansion. But inside, the atmosphere was heavy with determination and quiet urgency. Ethan, Rachel, Clara, and Lila sat around the large oak table in the dining room. Maps, documents, and sketches spread out before them. The team was preparing for their next move, setting up an art exhibition that would serve as both a trap and a statement. The stakes had never been higher. Ethan tapped the blueprint of the mansion's main hall, which had been transformed into a gallery. This is where we'll showcase Clara's pieces, he said, pointing to the layout. We'll make it look like an authentic event. Invitations have already been sent out to key players in the art world, including Richard's known associates. Clara frowned, her hands clenched around her coffee mug. And Richard? He's not going to just walk in without knowing there's something in it for him. Rachel smirked. That's where the bait comes in. She slid a photo of one of Clara's unfinished masterpieces across the table. This piece has been mentioned in several of Richard's communications. We'll position it as the centerpiece of the exhibition. Clara hesitated. That painting? It's deeply personal. Are you sure we need to use it? Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's the only way to draw him out. We'll protect it. And you. As the conversation continued, Lila raised her hand, a determined expression on her face. I want to help. Clara immediately shook her head. Lila, this is too dangerous. Mom, Lila said firmly, I'm not a little girl anymore. I can handle this. Besides, I'm good with details, and I've been helping organize the catering. Who's going to suspect the innocent caterer? Ethan smiled. She has a point, Clara. Lila's sharp, and she knows the layout better than anyone. We'll keep her role low risk. Clara sighed, reluctantly nodding. Fine, but you stay out of sight if things go south. Lila grinned. Deal. Later that day, Clara found herself alone in the makeshift gallery, staring at her painting. It was a hauntingly beautiful piece, a blend of abstract and realism that told the story of her life's struggles and triumphs. Her brush strokes carried secrets, pain, and a hope she hadn't felt in years. Ethan entered quietly, his presence grounding her. It's incredible, he said, standing beside her. Every time I look at it, I see something new. Clara sighed. I never thought I'd see these pieces displayed like this again. And now, they're being used as bait. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're not just using them as bait. We're using them to take back your story, your life. You're reclaiming what Richard tried to steal from you. Clara looked at him, her eyes misty. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Across the city, Richard Kane sat in his dimly lit office, a laptop open before him. His informant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. The invitations have gone out. The exhibition looks legitimate. Richard's lips curled into a sinister smile. And Clara's pieces? Are they authentic? From what I've seen, yes. The centerpiece is one of her most renowned works. Richard leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. Perfect. Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know every detail. The night of the exhibition arrived, and the mansion buzzed with a unique mix of energy and tension. Guests dressed in formal attire strolled through the main gallery, their chatter mingling with the soft strains of classical music. The mansion had been transformed into a world-class art venue, its walls adorned with Clara's masterpieces, each telling a fragment of her story. Clara stood near one of her paintings, a drink trembling in her hand. The room felt suffocating, even as guests approached her with admiration. Each compliment struck her with a mix of pride and fear, pride in her talent, and fear of the secrets her work held. Ethan noticed her unease and approached. "You're doing great," he said, his tone soft but reassuring. "Everyone here is in awe of your talent." Clara forced a smile. "It's not the admiration that bothers me, Ethan. It's the eyes watching for something more." Ethan nodded, understanding her implication. "Richard's here. I spotted him near the main entrance, mingling with the crowd. He'll approach when he thinks it's safe." Clara looked into Ethan's eyes, drawing strength from his calm demeanor. "I just hope we're ready for him." Richard Kane moved through the gallery with the confidence of a predator. His tailored suit and charismatic smile concealed the venom lurking beneath. He paused before one of Clara's pieces, his gaze narrowing as he examined the strokes. A small smirk played on his lips. He recognized her signature style. Rachel, stationed at the far end of the room, observed him closely. Through her earpiece, she whispered, "He's studying the paintings, trying to decipher the hidden messages. Stay sharp, everyone." Ethan, now positioned by the centerpiece painting, watched Richard's every move. He felt a surge of anger, but kept his composure. This wasn't the time for impulsiveness. Finally, Richard approached Clara, his presence imposing yet deceptively friendly. "Clara," he drawled, lifting a champagne flute, "your work never ceases to amaze me." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Richard, I didn't think you'd come." "Oh, how could I miss this?" Richard gestured around the room. "An entire exhibition dedicated to your genius? I wouldn't miss it for the world." Clara's grip on her glass tightened. "What do you want, Richard?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You know exactly what I want. The originals. They're mine, Clara. You can't hide them forever." Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "They were never yours to claim." Richard chuckled softly. "We'll see about that." As the evening progressed, the hidden details in Clara's paintings began to draw attention. A journalist frowned at a signature embedded in one piece. An art historian muttered to himself, recognizing the coordinates of a known forgery ring, subtly woven into another. Ethan, noticing the growing buzz, activated the next phase of the plan. He signaled Rachel, who quietly slipped out of the room, to coordinate with the authorities stationed nearby. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the gallery, Lila confronted Clara. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "why didn't you tell me the truth about Richard sooner?" Clara sighed, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wanted to protect you, Lila. From him. From the world he represents." Lila shook her head. "I'm not a child anymore. I deserve to know." "You're right," Clara admitted. "And I promise from now on, no more secrets." Ethan, overhearing their conversation, joined them. "We'll face whatever comes next together," he said, his voice resolute. As the night wore on, Richard's patience waned. He approached the centerpiece painting, his eyes scanning for the hidden messages he knew must be there. Clara, Ethan, and Lila watched from a distance, their hearts pounding. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as chaos erupted. When the lights returned, the centerpiece painting was gone, and so was Richard. A note, hastily scrawled, was left in its place. "You can't stop me." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "He's made his move," Rachel returned, breathless. "We've tracked his car. He's heading to the docks." Clara, her voice trembling but resolute, said, "Then let's end this, once and for all." The Morgan mansion was shrouded in a tense silence. After Richard's daring theft of Clara's masterpiece and his cryptic note, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Ethan, Clara, Lila, and Rachel convened in the study to devise their next move. Unknown to them, a shadow lurked within their circle. Earlier that evening, Richard had planted a mole among the guests, a charming young assistant posing as an art enthusiast. This mole, Nathaniel Nate Grayson, had blended seamlessly into the crowd, earning just enough trust to slip past unnoticed. Now, in the aftermath of the heist, Nate sent an encrypted message to Richard. "The painting is secured. Your plan is in motion. They suspect nothing." In the study, Ethan reviewed the security footage with Rachel, his jaw tightening, as he spotted Nate lingering near the centerpiece, moments before the blackout. "This guy," Ethan said, pointing to the screen. "Who is he? I don't remember inviting him." Rachel squinted at the footage. "That's Nate Grayson. Claims he's a freelance curator. But something about him felt off." Clara's voice trembled with anger. "He was working with Richard. I should have known." Ethan nodded. "We need to find him before he does any more damage." While Ethan and Rachel worked to track Nate, tensions flared between Clara and Lila in the next room. Lila, her emotions raw, questioned her mother's choices. "Why did you agree to this exhibition, Mom? You knew it would put us all in danger." Clara, equally fraught, snapped back. "I did it because it was the only way to expose Richard and his crimes. I'm trying to protect you." "But at what cost?" Lila shot back, tears in her eyes. "You're risking everything, our safety, our family, for paintings. Why didn't you just let it go?" Ethan, hearing the argument from the study, entered the room. "Enough," he said firmly. "We don't have time for this. If we start turning on each other, Richard wins." Clara and Lila exchanged guilty glances, realizing the truth in Ethan's words. Lila sighed, her voice softening. "I'm just scared, Mom." Clara pulled her daughter into a hug. "I know, sweetheart. So am I. But we'll get through this together." The next morning, Ethan's contacts in law enforcement provided a breakthrough. A tracking device embedded in the stolen painting revealed its location: a warehouse near the docks, notorious for its use in illicit activities. "We have less than 24 hours to act," Rachel said, spreading out a map of the area on the table. "Richard will probably move the painting soon. We can't wait." Ethan nodded. "Then we need a plan. We'll stake out the warehouse tonight and catch him in the act." Clara hesitated. "Are you sure this is safe? What if he has more people working for him?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be careful, but we can't let him slip away again." As evening fell, the team prepared for the stakeout. Rachel coordinated with local authorities to ensure backup would be available if needed. Ethan gathered surveillance equipment, while Clara and Lila packed essentials for the long night ahead. In a quiet moment before they left, Ethan found Clara in the studio, staring at an unfinished painting. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. Clara turned to him, her eyes filled with worry. I've already lost so much because of Richard. I can't lose you and Lila too." Ethan smiled softly. "You won't. We're in this together, remember?" Clara nodded, drawing strength from his words. "Together. The team arrived at the docks under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with the salty tang of the sea, and the sound of waves crashing against the pier echoed in the distance. They parked their van a safe distance away, setting up their equipment to monitor the warehouse. Through the surveillance feed, they spotted activity inside. Several men were moving crates, while Richard stood in the center barking orders. Ethan's jaw tightened at the sight of him. "There's the painting," Rachel whispered, pointing to a crate marked with Clara's initials. "Now we wait," Ethan replied, his voice low but steady. As the hours dragged on, tension mounted. Suddenly, their surveillance feed flickered, then went black. Rachel cursed under her breath. "Someone's tampering with our equipment." Ethan grabbed his radio. "Everyone stay alert." Before they could react, a voice crackled through their radio, Nate's voice. "Nice try, Ethan. But Richard always stays one step ahead." Ethan's grip on the radio tightened. "Nate, I should have known." Nate's laugh was cold. "You really thought you could outsmart him? You're playing in the big leagues now, kid." Ethan exchanged a glance with Rachel. "We've been made. Time to move." The team sprang into action, coordinating with the authorities as they approached the warehouse. A tense standoff ensued as they confronted Richard and his men. The air was thick with adrenaline as shouts and commands echoed through the warehouse. Ethan faced Richard directly, his voice firm. "It's over, Richard. Surrender now, and maybe you'll get leniency." Richard smirked, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You think you've won, Ethan? You have no idea what you're up against." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion broke out. Nate had reappeared, holding Lila at gunpoint. "Nobody moves, or she gets hurt," Clara cried out in fear. But Lila, her eyes filled with determination, acted swiftly. In a moment of bravery, she stomped on Nate's foot and twisted out of his grasp, grabbing a nearby wrench to defend herself. The distraction allowed Rachel and Ethan to subdue Nate, while Clara rushed to Lila's side, hugging her tightly. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Lila nodded, though her hands still shook. "I'm fine, but we need to finish this." As the authorities secured the scene and arrested Richard's men, they discovered a hidden room in the warehouse. Inside, they found not only more stolen paintings, but also documents linking Richard to an international forgery ring. Ethan picked up one of the documents, his face darkening. "This isn't over. Richard's network is bigger than we thought." Rachel nodded grimly. "Then we'll take it down piece by piece." As they exited the warehouse, the team knew the battle was far from won. The shadows of Richard's crimes loomed large, and the fight for justice was just beginning. The night of the exhibition dawned crisp and clear, with the Morgan mansion glowing under the soft light of hundreds of fairy lights strung along its exterior. The event was set to be the most talked-about gala of the season, with an exclusive guest list that read like a who's who of the art world. Beneath the glamour, however, a storm of tension brewed. The Morgan family and their allies worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect. Ethan, now more determined than ever, personally oversaw the arrangement of the art pieces. Clara's newly unveiled works hung prominently in the grand hall, their vibrant colors and intricate details captivating even before the first guest arrived. Lila, wearing a sleek emerald green dress, moved through the venue like a seasoned coordinator, directing caterers and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Her once shy demeanor had been replaced with a quiet confidence, a testament to her growth over the past weeks. Rachel, dressed in an understated black gown, stayed in the background, earpiece in place as she coordinated with the undercover security team. The tension was palpable as she briefed Ethan in hushed tones. We've got eyes on every corner of the mansion. If Richard or any of his associates make a move, we'll know." Ethan nodded, his jaw set. "Tonight, we end this." As the clock struck 7, the first guests began to arrive. The mansion's opulent foyer filled with the sound of conversation and laughter as attendees marveled at the grandeur of the setting. Among them were prominent journalists, collectors, and critics, each eager to see Clara's long-awaited return to the art scene. Ethan greeted each guest with a polite smile, but his eyes constantly scanned the crowd. He spotted Clara standing near her paintings, graciously accepting compliments, while subtly guiding viewers to the hidden messages embedded in her work. "You've outdone yourself, Clara," Ethan said quietly as he approached her. "They're already in awe." Clara smiled faintly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Let's hope they notice the truth we've hidden." The murmur of conversation dimmed as Richard Kane made his entrance. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, he exuded confidence and charm. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Clara and then on Ethan, who had stepped forward to greet him. "Mr. Kane," Ethan said, his tone neutral, "welcome." "Ethan," Richard replied smoothly, extending a hand. "I must say, you've done a remarkable job here. Your taste is impeccable." Ethan shook his hand, hiding his distaste. "Enjoy the exhibition. I think you'll find it quite revealing." Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened slightly as he moved past Ethan. Clara, watching from a distance, felt a chill run down her spine. She instinctively glanced at Lila, who was stationed near the entrance to the kitchen, overseeing the catering team. Lila caught her mother's eye and gave a small nod of reassurance. They had rehearsed this moment countless times, but the reality of Richard's presence was far more unsettling than they had anticipated. As the evening progressed, guests began to take notice of the subtle details in Clara's paintings. A date scrawled in the corner of one canvas matched the timestamp of a notorious heist. A series of numbers etched into another piece corresponded to a bank account tied to illicit activities. Whispers spread through the crowd as connections were made, and journalists hurriedly took notes. Meanwhile, Rachel monitored Richard closely, noting his every move. "He's too calm," she muttered into her earpiece. "He knows something." In a secluded corner of the mansion, Ethan and Rachel convened to discuss their next steps. "We need to push him," Ethan said. "Get him to make a mistake." Rachel nodded. "Leave it to me." Rachel approached Richard under the guise of casual conversation, her smile disarming. "Mr. Kane, your reputation precedes you. I've heard you have an eye for undiscovered talent." Richard chuckled, his tone dripping with false humility. "I try. The art world is full of hidden gems after all." Rachel leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "Speaking of hidden gems, what do you think of Clara's new pieces? They're quite illuminating." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, before returning. "They're remarkable, truly. Clara has always had a unique perspective." Rachel noted the slight edge in his voice and pressed further. "It's fascinating how much a painting can reveal, don't you think?" Richard's gaze hardened, but before he could respond, the lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on moments later, chaos erupted. One of Clara's centerpiece paintings, the one containing the most damning evidence against Richard, was missing. In its place was a note, scrawled in elegant handwriting. "Art is fleeting, but the truth endures." Ethan's heart sank as he scanned the room. Richard was nowhere to be seen. Rachel barked orders into her earpiece, rallying the security team. "Lock down the mansion. He couldn't have gotten far." Clara stood frozen, staring at the empty space where her painting had been. Lila rushed to her side, her voice trembling. "Mom, what do we do?" Clara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We finish this." As the security team fanned out, across the mansion and its grounds, Ethan and Rachel sprinted towards the security room. They reviewed the footage, watching in frustration as Richard's figure disappeared into the shadows moments before the blackout. "He planned this," Ethan muttered. "He knew exactly what he was doing." Rachel's jaw clenched. "Then we'll outsmart him. This isn't over." Outside the mansion, a sleek black car sped away into the night. Inside, Richard sat with the stolen painting resting beside him, a satisfied smirk on his face. He took out his phone and made a call. "It's done," he said. "Proceed with the next phase." As the car disappeared into the city, the camera panned back to the Morgan mansion, where Ethan, Clara, and Lila stood together, their expressions a mix of determination and fear. "This isn't the end," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll get him." Clara nodded, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We have to, for all of us." The chapter closed on the image of the family standing united against the darkness, ready to face whatever came next. The cold night air sliced through Ethan Maxwell as he sprinted across the manicured lawn of the Morgan mansion. His heart pounded and adrenaline coursed through his veins as he shouted into the earpiece connected to Rachel Perez. "He's heading for the West Gate. Do we have eyes on him?" Rachel's voice crackled through the connection, her tone sharp and urgent. "West Gate cameras are down. He's disabling the system as he moves. We're running on ground-level visuals now." Ethan pushed harder, his dress shoes slipping on the dewy grass. In the distance, he spotted a shadowed figure darting toward the gate. It was unmistakably Richard Kane, the stolen painting clutched under his arm like a prize. "Don't let him get to the car," Rachel barked, her voice filled with tension. "Backup is on the way, but we need to stall him." Richard reached the gate and threw it open, slipping through with an ease that belied his age. Ethan followed close behind, his breath ragged, as he squeezed through the narrow opening before it slammed shut. "Stop, Richard!" Ethan shouted, his voice echoing into the quiet street. Richard didn't stop. He jumped into a waiting black sedan, its engine roaring to life. As the car began to pull away, Ethan reached for the nearest object, a heavy stone from the garden, and hurled it with all his strength. The stone struck the rear windshield, shattering it and causing the car to screech to a halt. The driver, a burly man dressed in black, jumped out, brandishing a weapon. Ethan froze momentarily, his mind racing. Before the man could act, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Rachel, armed and ready. "Drop it," she commanded, her weapon trained on the driver. The man hesitated, glancing between Rachel and Richard, who was still in the car. Richard's voice cut through the tension. "Stand down. We don't need more trouble." Reluctantly, the driver lowered his weapon, but his posture remained tense. Richard stepped out of the car, his face a mask of calm. "You're persistent, Ethan," Richard said, his tone almost amused. "But you're out of your depth." Ethan squared his shoulders, his chest heaving from exertion. "You stole that painting. You think you can just walk away?" Richard smirked. "You really don't understand, do you? This isn't just about the painting. It's about power, control, things you can't begin to grasp." Rachel stepped closer, her weapon still trained on the driver. "Hand it over, Richard. You've lost." Richard's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. "Lost? You think a single painting will bring me down? The game is far more complex than you realize." Ethan took a step forward, his fists clenched. "We know about your network. The forgeries, the bribery, the blackmail, it's all going to come out. Richard's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. You think you can stop me? You don't have the reach, the connections. Ethan's voice was steady as he replied, maybe not, but we have the truth. And we're not afraid of you. Before Richard could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police had arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the street. Richard's calm demeanor slipped, replaced by a flicker of panic. This isn't over, he hissed, his voice low and menacing. He made a sudden move toward the painting. But Ethan was faster. In one swift motion, Ethan wrested it from Richard's grasp, holding it tightly against his chest. Richard lunged, but Rachel stepped between them, her weapon still raised. Enough, she barked. It's over, Richard. The police officers exited their vehicles, their weapons drawn. Freeze, one of them shouted. Hands where we can see them. Richard raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of fury and resignation. The driver attempted to run, but he was quickly subdued by the officers. Ethan handed the painting to Rachel, who inspected it carefully before nodding. It's intact. The drive back to the Morgan mansion was quiet, the weight of the night's events pressing down on everyone. Ethan stared out the window, his mind racing with thoughts of what Richard's next move might be. When they arrived, Clara and Lila were waiting anxiously in the foyer. Clara's face lit up with relief when she saw the painting, but her expression quickly turned serious when she noticed Ethan's exhaustion. Are you okay? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Ethan nodded, his grip on the painting unwavering. We got it back. But this isn't over. Rachel stepped forward, her expression grim. He's in custody, but he's already laying the groundwork for his defense. We need to move fast. Clara glanced at the painting, her fingers brushing over the edge of the canvas. This is the key, she said softly. Everything we need to expose him is here. The family gathered in the study, the painting carefully placed on the table in front of them. Matthew Davis joined them, his presence a calming force amid the chaos. We need to ensure this painting reaches the right hands, Matthew said. The messages Clara embedded are clear, but they need to be interpreted correctly. Ethan nodded. We've already contacted the authorities. Rachel is coordinating with them to ensure the evidence is secure. Lila, sitting quietly until now, spoke up. What about Richard's network? Even if he's arrested, his associates could still operate. Rachel leaned forward, her expression determined. That's why we need to dismantle it completely. Every piece of evidence we've gathered will be used to bring them down. As the meeting concluded, Clara approached Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. You risked everything tonight, she said. Thank you. Ethan shook his head. We're in this together, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect this family. Lila stepped closer, her voice soft. You're part of this family now, Ethan. We couldn't have done this without you. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of belonging, a connection he had been searching for his entire life. We'll get through this, he said, his voice steady. Together. Later that night, as the household finally settled, Ethan stood alone in the study, staring at the recovered painting. His thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of his phone. The caller ID showed an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hello, a distorted voice replied, sending a chill down his spine. You think you've won. The game has only just begun. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened as the line went dead. The weight of the threat hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the battle was far from over. The chapter closed with Ethan standing in the dimly lit study, the painting behind him, and the city's lights twinkling outside. The stakes had never been higher, but his resolve was unshakable. The Morgan mansion was unusually quiet the morning after the dramatic chase. The air was thick with tension, the kind that follows a battle won, but not yet celebrated. Ethan sat in the grand study, his gaze fixed on the recovered painting displayed on the easel before him. The intricate strokes, the layered colors, and the embedded codes were not just Clara's masterpiece. They were a key to exposing Richard's empire. "Ethan?" Clara's voice broke the silence as she entered, a cup of steaming tea in her hands. Her face, though still lined with worry, held a softness that suggested cautious hope. "You've been here all night?" He nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about what's next. Richard may be in custody, but he's not defeated. He's already made his next move. I can feel it." Clara placed the cup on the desk and sat across from him. "That's why we need to stay ahead of him. The messages in this painting, they'll be enough to start unraveling his network, but we need to act fast." Ethan's phone buzzed on the desk, drawing both their attention. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. "Ethan?" Rachel began as he answered, her tone brisk and professional. "It's all over the news. Richard's arrest has set off a media storm. Journalists are digging into his background, and several of his associates are already distancing themselves. This is the window we need to strike." Ethan leaned forward, his mind racing. "What's the next step?" "We need to ensure the authorities have everything they need," Rachel replied. "I've scheduled a meeting with federal investigators this afternoon. They're expecting you, Clara, and the painting. This is our chance to put it all on the table." Clara, listening in, nodded resolutely. "I'll go with you. It's time to face this head on." Before the meeting, Clara found Lila in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. The aroma of herbs and spices filled the air, a comforting contrast to the tension that had gripped the house. "You've been quiet," Clara said softly, leaning against the counter. Lila shrugged, her movements slow and deliberate. "Just processing. Last night was a lot." Clara reached out, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You were brave, Lila. I'm proud of you." Lila turned to face her mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you think this will ever end, Mom? The running, the fear?" Clara pulled her into a hug. "It will. We'll make sure of it. We have each other, and we have Ethan. Together, we're stronger than anything Richard can throw at us." The federal building in downtown Manhattan loomed tall, its glass facade reflecting the bustling city streets. Ethan, Clara, and Rachel entered through the revolving doors, the recovered painting carefully wrapped and carried in a protective case. They were ushered into a conference room where two federal agents awaited them. One, Agent Daniels, was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The other, Agent Monroe, was a younger woman whose calm composure belied her intensity. "Thank you for coming," Agent Daniels began, as they took their seats. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence provided by Ms. Perez, and we believe we have enough to launch a full-scale investigation. But we'll need your cooperation to ensure this holds up in court." Ethan nodded, placing the case on the table. "Everything you need is in this painting." Clara embedded messages, dates, names, locations, all linked to Richard's network. As the agents examined the painting, Clara explained the process of encoding the information. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the past was evident in her tone. Agent Monroe looked up, her expression one of awe. "This is remarkable. You've not only created a masterpiece, but a roadmap to dismantling a criminal empire." As the investigation gained traction, News outlets across the country covered the unfolding scandal. Headlines detailed Richard's arrest, his connection to the art forgery network, and the brave stand taken by Ethan and Clara. Television panels debated the implications of the case, with experts analyzing the intricate details of Clara's artwork. Public opinion was divided. Some hailed her as a hero, while others questioned her involvement in Richard's schemes. Ethan watched one such broadcast from the mansion's living room, his frustration mounting. "They don't understand," he muttered. "She's risking everything to set things right." Lila sat beside him, her hand on his arm. "Not everyone will see the truth right away, but we know what she's done. That's what matters." Amid the chaos, Clara received an unexpected phone call. An old friend from the art world, Miranda Hayes, had seen the news and reached out. "Clara, it's been years," Miranda said, her voice warm despite the distance. "I saw your painting on TV. It's extraordinary. I want to help." Clara felt a surge of emotion. Miranda had been a mentor and confidant during her early career, before Richard's influence had tainted her world. "Thank you, Miranda. Your support means more than you know." Miranda's offered to host a follow-up exhibition to showcase Clara's untainted work, providing a platform for her to rebuild her reputation. As the days passed, the Morgan Mansion became a hub of activity. Journalists, investigators, and allies came and went, all working toward the common goal of bringing Richard's empire to its knees. Ethan and Clara found themselves growing closer, their shared determination forging a bond that felt unbreakable. Late one evening, as they sat on the mansion's terrace, Ethan turned to her. "Do you think we'll ever have peace after this?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Clara looked out at the city lights, her expression contemplative. "Peace isn't something that just happens. It's something we create. And with you, Lila, and everyone who's stood by us, I believe we can find it." Just as things seemed to be stabilizing, a package arrived at the mansion. It bore no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. Ethan opened it cautiously, his breath catching, as he revealed its contents. A small canvas, painted in a style eerily similar to Clara's, but with a dark, foreboding twist. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's a message," she whispered. Ethan examined the painting closely, his jaw tightening. In the bottom corner was a signature, Richard's. The chapter ended with Ethan and Clara exchanging a look of determination. Whatever Richard's next move was, they would face it together. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of the Morgan Mansion, casting a warm glow over the family gathered in the living room. Despite the unsettling message from Richard, a renewed sense of determination filled the air. This chapter would mark the beginning of Clara's return to the art world, a redemption not just for her, but for everyone who had been affected by Richard's manipulations. Clara sat at the dining table, rereading the invitation from Miranda Hayes. The gallery owner had extended an offer to host a special exhibition dedicated to Clara's authentic works. It was a chance to reclaim her name and her art, free from the shadow of Richard's schemes. "This is your moment, Mom," Lila said, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You've spent so long hiding. It's time to show the world who you really are." Ethan chimed in from across the room. "We'll be there every step of the way. And this isn't just about the art. It's about standing up to Richard and proving that he can't control you anymore." Clara's gaze softened as she looked at her daughter and Ethan. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "This is more than an exhibition. It's a declaration. But we need to be prepared for whatever Richard might do." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Miranda Hayes arrived at the mansion to help Clara curate the pieces for the show. She brought with her a team of art restorers and assistants to ensure the works were in pristine condition. "This one," Miranda said, pointing to a vibrant urban landscape. "It's one of your best. The way you captured the light, the movement. It's breathtaking." Clara smiled faintly. "I painted that during a time when I still believed in beauty. Before Richard," Miranda placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "And now, you'll show the world that beauty again." Meanwhile, Ethan and Lila worked tirelessly to ensure the event's success. Ethan used his connections to invite influential figures, from art critics to philanthropists. Lila, with her natural organizational skills, coordinated everything from the catering to the security details. Amidst the preparations, Ethan announced the launch of a new initiative, the Maxwell Art Foundation, dedicated to supporting young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. "This isn't just about funding art," Ethan explained during a meeting with potential donors. "It's about giving people like Clara and Lila a platform to tell their stories. Art has the power to change lives. It changed mine." Lila, listening from the back of the room, felt a swell of pride. Ethan's journey from a disillusioned millionaire to a man of purpose had been transformative. She could see the passion in his eyes, a stark contrast to the man she had first met. The evening of the exhibition arrived with an air of anticipation. The gallery, a sleek and modern space in downtown Manhattan, was filled with Clara's works. Each painting told a story of struggle, resilience, and triumph. Guests began to arrive, dressed in elegant attire and speaking in hushed tones as they admired the art. Among them were journalists, collectors, and even a few of Richard's former associates, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a spectacle. Ethan, dressed in a tailored suit, greeted each guest with charm and composure. Lila, radiant in a crimson dress, moved through the crowd, ensuring everything ran smoothly. At the center of it all was Clara. She wore a simple yet elegant gown, her hair pulled back to reveal her striking features. For the first time in years, she stood tall, her confidence slowly returning with each passing moment. As the evening progressed, Miranda took the stage to introduce Clara and her work. "Tonight, we celebrate not just an artist, but a survivor," Miranda began, her voice ringing clear through the room. "Clara Thompson's journey has been one of extraordinary courage. Her art is a testament to the power of truth, even in the face of adversity." The audience erupted into applause as Clara stepped forward. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Art has always been my voice," she said, her words steady. "It's how I've expressed my joys, my fears, and my dreams. For years, that voice was silenced. But tonight, I'm reclaiming it. This isn't just my story, it's ours. To everyone who has ever felt powerless, know that your voice matters. Your truth matters." The crowd's applause was thunderous, and for the first time in years, Clara felt seen, not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. However, the evening was not without tension. Richard Kane's presence loomed, even in his absence. Several guests whispered about the ongoing investigation and the damning evidence tied to his network. Toward the end of the night, Ethan received a call from Rachel. Her tone was grave. "Ethan, I just got word that Richard's associates are planning something. I don't have all the details yet, but you need to stay vigilant." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Understood. Keep me updated." He hung up and turned to Lila, who had noticed his change in demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Richard's not done," Ethan replied. "We need to be ready." Despite the undercurrent of unease, the exhibition was a resounding success. Several pieces sold for record-breaking amounts, with all proceeds going to the Maxwell Art Foundation. As the last guest departed, Clara stood in the empty gallery, taking in the sight of her work displayed so beautifully. "You did it," Ethan said, approaching her. "Tonight was a victory." Clara smiled, though her eyes were tinged with sadness. "It's a start, but there's still so much to do." Later that night, back at the mansion, a package arrived for Ethan. Inside was a small sculpture, a replica of one of Clara's earlier works, now warped and twisted. Alongside it was a note in Richard's handwriting. "Redemption is fleeting. See you soon." Ethan stared at the note, his mind racing. The battle was far from over, but as he looked around at Clara and Lila, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, they would not be cast down. The morning after the triumphant yet tense exhibition, a sense of accomplishment hung in the air at the Morgan mansion. Clara sat by the window of her makeshift studio, gazing out at the city skyline. Her paintings, once hidden in shame and fear, were now celebrated works of art. However, the shadow of Richard Kane's threat lingered like a dark cloud over her newfound freedom. Ethan entered the room with 2 mugs of steaming coffee, handing one to Clara. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. Clara shook her head. "The exhibition was a dream come true, but I can't shake the feeling that Richard won't let it end here." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "Rachel confirmed as much last night. Richard is still moving pieces behind the scenes, but we'll be ready for him." Downstairs, Lila was in the kitchen, experimenting with recipes. The savory aroma of her latest creation filled the air. Cooking had become her escape, a way to channel her energy and cope with the whirlwind of changes. As she plated her dish, Miranda Hayes entered the kitchen, her eyes lighting up at the sight. "What smells so divine?" "It's just something simple," Lila replied modestly, setting the plate on the counter. Miranda took a bite and let out an appreciative hum. "Simple? This could rival the best restaurants in the city. Have you ever considered culinary school?" Lila blinked in surprise. "Culinary school?" Miranda smiled. "You have real talent, Lila. I know a few people who could help you get started." Ethan, who had just entered the kitchen with Clara, overheard the conversation. "You should do it, Lila," he encouraged. "You've spent so much time helping us. It's time to focus on your dreams." Lila hesitated, torn between her desire to support Clara and Ethan and the thought of pursuing her own passion. "I'll think about it," she said with a small smile. Later that afternoon, Rachel Perez arrived with important updates. She spread a series of documents across the dining table as Ethan, Clara, and Lila gathered around. "Richard has been transferring funds to offshore accounts," Rachel explained, pointing to the documents. "But here's the interesting part. Some of these transactions are linked to companies owned by his former allies. It looks like they're starting to turn on him." Ethan leaned over the table, studying the documents. "If his network is fracturing, we might have an opportunity to strike. What's our next move?" Rachel smirked. "We convince one of his allies to talk. There's a collector named Vincent Gray who has been distancing himself from Richard. If we can get him on our side, it could be the break we need." Clara frowned. "Vincent Gray? I remember him. He bought several pieces from Richard, including some of my stolen works." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll get them back, along with the evidence we need to end this once and for all." The following day, Ethan arranged a meeting with Vincent Gray at a high-end restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he arrived early, determined to make an impression. When Vincent entered, his demeanor was cautious but curious. "Mr. Maxwell," he greeted, shaking Ethan's hand. "I must admit, I was surprised to receive your invitation." "Thank you for coming," Ethan replied, motioning for him to sit. I'll get straight to the point. Well, I know you've been working with Richard Kane, but I also know you've been pulling away from him recently. Vincent's expression darkened. Richard is a dangerous man. I regret ever getting involved with him, but leaving isn't as simple as you might think. Ethan leaned forward, his tone firm. We have a chance to take him down, but we need your help. If you cooperate, I can ensure your name stays out of the spotlight. Vincent hesitated, the weight of his decision evident on his face. Finally, he nodded. What do you need? Back at the mansion, Leela was deep in thought. Miranda's suggestion about culinary school had sparked something in her, but she struggled with the idea of leaving her family behind. Clara found her sitting on the back patio, gazing at the garden. You've been quiet today, Clara said, taking a seat beside her. Lila sighed. Miranda thinks I should go to culinary school. Ethan agrees, but I don't know if I can leave. Clara took her daughter's hand, her voice gentle. Lila, you've spent so much of your life worrying about me. It's time for you to focus on yourself. Pursuing your dreams doesn't mean you're leaving us. It means you're building a future for yourself. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes. Do you really think I can do it? Clara smiled. I know you can, and I'll be here cheering you on every step of the way. Meanwhile, Ethan and Rachel began working with Vincent Gray to uncover more details about Richard's operations. Through Vincent, they gained access to confidential documents and private communications that revealed the full extent of Richard's schemes. This is it, Rachel said one evening, spreading the evidence across the table. We have enough to take him down. Ethan nodded, determination burning in his eyes. Then let's finish this. As the family prepared for the final confrontation, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Clara continued to work on new pieces, pouring her emotions into her art. Lila began researching culinary schools, her excitement growing with each discovery. And Ethan coordinated with Rachel and the authorities, ensuring that every detail of their plan was airtight. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Ethan raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, his voice filled with hope. We've come so far, and no matter what happens next, I'm proud of all of us. Clara and Lila clinked their glasses with his, a sense of unity and determination binding them together. As the night wore on, a knock at the door interrupted their moment of peace. Alfred entered the dining rooms, his expression grave. Mr. Maxwell, there's someone here to see you. They claim to have information about Richard Kane. Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Clara and Lila before standing. Send them in. The visitor, a disheveled man clutching a briefcase, entered the room. Mr. Maxwell, he said, his voice trembling. My name is Daniel Harper. I used to work for Richard Kane, and I have information you need. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What kind of information? Daniel hesitated before opening the briefcase, revealing a stack of documents. This is everything. Names, dates, transactions. But you need to act fast. Richard knows I've turned, and he won't stop until he silences me. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Ethan glanced at Clara and Lila, their faces etched with determination. This is it, Ethan said quietly. The final piece we need to bring him down. As the family prepared for the battle ahead, they knew the road would be treacherous, but together, they would face whatever came their way, united by love, courage, and an unbreakable bond. Morning dawned with a quiet intensity over the Morgan mansion. The family gathered in the study. The stack of documents Daniel Harper had brought now spread out across the table. Ethan, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, exuded a calm determination that masked the nervous energy bubbling beneath the surface. Clara and Lila, seated on either side of him, shared glances of resolve. This day would determine their future. "We have everything we need," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we can't afford any mistakes. Rachel and the authorities are ready, but Richard is cunning. He'll have a backup plan." Clara nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "He always does. That's why we need to stay one step ahead." Ethan turned to Lila, who was unusually quiet. "Lila, you don't have to be involved in this part. It's going to be dangerous." Lila met his gaze with a fierce determination. "We're in this together, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." The city's courthouse was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed their lives in recent months. Reporters and cameras lined the steps, their questions blending into an unintelligible buzz as the Morgan family arrived. Rachel Perez joined them at the entrance, her presence a reassuring anchor amidst the storm. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Richard Kane, flanked by his high-powered legal team, sat confidently at the defense table. His smug demeanor betrayed no hint of the pressure mounting against him. The prosecution began by presenting the evidence Daniel had provided, a web of financial records, forged contracts, and communication logs that painted a damning picture of Richard's illegal operations. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer, eroding the confidence Richard so carefully displayed. As the evidence was presented, Clara watched Richard's expression shift from confidence to unease. For the first time, she saw cracks in the armor of the man who had once controlled her life. The sight filled her with a mix of vindication and resolve. The highlight of the trial came when Clara took the stand. Dressed elegantly in a cream-colored suit, she exuded a quiet strength that captivated the courtroom. The prosecutor began gently. "Miss Morgan, could you please describe your relationship with the defendant?" Clara took a deep breath. "I met Richard Kane many years ago when I was an aspiring artist. He promised to help me achieve my dreams, but his promises were a facade for manipulation and exploitation." As she recounted the years of deceit, the courtroom fell silent. Clara's voice wavered only once when she spoke of the night Richard threatened her family. Her honesty and vulnerability resonated deeply, turning public opinion firmly against Richard. When the defense attempted to discredit her, Clara held her ground. Each question was met with calm, concise answers that left no room for doubt. By the time she stepped down from the stand, the courtroom was abuzz with whispers of admiration. During a recess, Ethan found himself alone with Richard in the hallway. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Enjoying the show, Maxwell?" Richard sneered, his arrogance undeterred. Ethan met his gaze with a cold intensity. "This isn't a show, Richard. It's justice, and it's long overdue." Richard leaned closer, his voice low and threatening. "You think this is over? I have connections you can't even imagine. Whatever happens here, I'll walk away." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to the bait. "Not this time," he said firmly. "Your power ends today." After days of grueling testimonies and legal battles, the jury returned with a verdict. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as the judge called for order. "We find the defendant, Richard Kane, guilty on all counts." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. Lila squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Richard, for his part, maintained his composure, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Clara and hissed, "This isn't over." Clara met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Yes, It is. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy reached its peak. News outlets reported the trial as a landmark case that exposed the corruption embedded in the art world. Clara's bravery and Ethan's determination became the focal points of countless headlines, casting them as symbols of resilience and justice. For the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of freedom. She had faced her past and emerged stronger, ready to reclaim her life and legacy. That evening, the Morgan family gathered in the mansion's living room. The weight of the trial lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. Ethan raised a glass of champagne. "To Clara," he said, his voice filled with pride. "For her courage and strength, you inspire us all." Clara smiled, her cheeks flushing. "And to Ethan, for never giving up. We couldn't have done this without you." They clinked glasses, their laughter filling the room. For the first time in months, the future felt bright. As the family celebrated, Rachel approached Ethan with a somber expression. "There's something you should know," she said quietly, handing him a file. Ethan's smile faded as he opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents. "What is this?" Rachel hesitated. "It's about Richard's network. We dismantled one piece, but there's more. His associates are already regrouping." Ethan closed the file, his jaw set in determination. "Then we'll be ready." Clara overheard the exchange and joined them. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The grand reopening of Clara's first independent art exhibition since her return to the art world was held in a prominent Manhattan gallery. The event, titled Redemption: The Art of Truth, symbolized not only Clara's personal journey, but also the story of her family's resilience. The gallery, a fusion of sleek modernity and timeless charm, was illuminated by soft, ambient lighting, casting a warm glow over the paintings that lined its walls. Each piece told a story. Clara's signature strokes were more expressive than ever, and the works captured the pain, joy, and triumph she had experienced over the years. The centerpiece of the exhibition, a towering canvas titled Phoenix Rising, depicted a mythical bird soaring above the ashes of its past, a direct reflection of Clara's journey. Lila, dressed in a tailored emerald green dress, buzzed around the gallery, greeting guests and ensuring the evening flowed smoothly. Ethan stood beside Clara, his tailored suit and confident demeanor, a reminder of how far he had come from the disillusioned man he had once been. "You did it, Mom," Lila whispered to Clara, her voice filled with pride. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We did it, all of us." At the edge of the room, a small but impactful display showcased Ethan's latest venture, the Maxwell Foundation for Artists and Justice. A series of interactive screens detailed the foundation's mission to support emerging artists, provide grants to underrepresented communities, and fund legal assistance for those exploited in the art world. A promotional video looped silently, showing Ethan speaking passionately about the foundation's goals. "Art has the power to heal, to inspire, and to expose the truth," his recorded voice declared. "This foundation is our commitment to ensuring no one faces the struggles Clara endured." Guests clustered around the display, murmuring their approval. Many signed up for donations, inspired by the tangible hope Ethan and Clara had cultivated. Meanwhile, Lila had found her own path. After months of soul-searching, she enrolled in a culinary arts program and quickly distinguished herself with her innovative approach to blending flavors. At the exhibition, she presented a selection of hors d'oeuvres she had prepared, each inspired by one of Clara's paintings. "These are delicious," a guest remarked after sampling a canapé. "You're an artist in your own right." Leela blushed, her smile radiant. "Thank you." I've had the best mentors." Her eyes darted to Ethan and Clara, who were deep in conversation with a prominent art critic. For the first time, Lila felt not like an outsider, but like an integral part of a family, destined to make a difference. As the night progressed, familiar faces from Clara's past began to emerge. Old colleagues, who had once distanced themselves during her struggles, now approached her with apologies and admiration. One such guest was Amelia Ford, a renowned gallery owner who had once championed Clara's early works. "Clara, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to see your name celebrated again," Amelia said, her voice brimming with genuine emotion. "It's good to be back," Clara replied warmly, though her gaze flickered briefly to Ethan, who stood nearby. He caught her eye and nodded reassuringly, silently reminding her of how far they had come. Just as the event was reaching its peak, a hush fell over the crowd as an unexpected figure entered the gallery. Richard Kane, dressed in an understated suit, moved slowly through the room, his presence commanding attention, despite the tension it evoked. Ethan stiffened, his protective instincts kicking in. "What's he doing here?" he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Clara placed a hand on his arm, her touch steadying him. "Let him be," she said softly. "He's not here to cause trouble." Richard approached Clara cautiously, his expression unreadable. "Your work is extraordinary as always," he said, his voice lacking its usual venom. Clara regarded him for a long moment before replying. "Thank you, Richard. I hope you find peace." For a brief moment, the man who had once been her greatest tormentor seemed almost human. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving a ripple of unease in his wake. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan stepped onto a small stage set up at the back of the gallery. He held a glass of champagne, his expression a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "This exhibition isn't just about art. It's about resilience, redemption, and the power of truth. My mother's journey has taught me that, even in our darkest moments, there is always a spark of light, waiting to guide us." He turned to Clara, his eyes softening. "Mom, you are that light for me, for Lila, and for everyone here tonight. This gallery is just the beginning of the legacy you've created." Applause erupted, the sound reverberating through the gallery. Clara stepped forward, her own glass raised. "And to Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for giving me a second chance." Their glasses clinked, and the applause grew louder, a testament to the lives they had touched. After the last guest had departed, the family lingered in the now empty gallery. The silence felt sacred, a moment of calm after the storm. Ethan leaned against the wall, a contented smile playing on his lips. "This feels like a new beginning," he said. Clara nodded, her gaze sweeping over her paintings. "It is. For all of us." Lila joined them, holding a tray of leftover pastries. "So, what's next?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes serious. Ethan glanced at Clara, then back at Lila. "Whatever it is, we face it together." Clara reached for her children's hands, her heart full. Together. As they turned off the lights and stepped into the cool night air, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows. A man, his face obscured, held a small notebook, jotting something down, before disappearing into the darkness. And just like that, their story reminds us all that even in the darkest moments, hope and resilience can light the way forward. But what would you have done if you were in Ethan's shoes? Would you have trusted Clara and Lila, or taken a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if this story left you inspired, or wondering what's next, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's more to come. Stories that will touch your heart, challenge your mind, and keep you coming back for more. See you in the next chapter of our journey. Until then, stay curious, stay hopeful, and stay tuned